In this video, we'll go beneath the surface of the dynamic range compressor and uncover 5 advanced controls that you should know about to become a compression master. Hi, I'm Daniel, and this is the rabbit hole where we examine digital audio technology and see how deep the rabbit hole goes. In the last video, we had a look at the basic concepts of using dynamic range compression, and this time we'll cover some of the more advanced parameters that you'll find in most compressors, such as sidechain, lookahead, knees, stereo linking, and peak versus RMS sensing. These topics are a bit more fragmented and loosely related, but they all serve useful purposes in audio compression. And in this series, we seek to gain a deeper understanding of how those things work. With that being said, let's have a closer look and get into some real, funny computer business. So here's a pretty essential concept to dynamic range compressors, which is the sidechain. Maybe you've heard this term before. Sidechain compression often refers to that classic technique in dance music where you'd sidechain the compressor on a sound to the kick drum, which will duck the volume of the sound when the kick is present, producing a pumping kind of dynamic expression. The same technique is also often used in radio production, where you'd want to automatically duck the volume of a music track while the host is speaking. By now, the sidechain has become an essential component of most modern compressors. We'll get into why and how this works in a later video, but for now you can think of it as a way to make the compressor on a sound react to something different than the sound itself. In the instance of dance music, that could be making the dynamic of a bass line react to the volume of a kick drum. And in the instance of podcasts or YouTube videos, it could be making the background music react to the volume of a voiceover. In another use case, it could also be having the compressor react to a filtered version of the same sound. For example, if you wanted to turn down the volume of sibilants in a vocal, like Fs, Ts, and Ss, you can have the compressor react to a filtered version of the same vocal where the sibilants are strongly accentuated. This way, it will reduce the volume more strongly at the points where the vocal has stronger sibilants, essentially making what's called a broadband de-esser. Let's demonstrate that with a quick example in Ableton Live. So here in my Ableton Live project, I have 2 tracks. I have a music track, which we have down here, and I have a voiceover track. And what I'd want to do in this particular scenario is I want to duck the music while the host is speaking. What I'll do is I'll use the sidechain. I can find that in the stock Ableton Live compressor by pressing this little arrow button. And you see now here on the left, we have sidechain, and now I can select audio from, which is the sidechain input, and I'll select voiceover. And if we play this, you'll now see that the compressor will show us the audio coming in from the speaker instead of the music track, but it'll still play the music track.
And here comes your slightly poorly trained, overly sibilant radio host.
But we're still not doing anything, so let's reduce that threshold and increase that ratio. I'll do a quick attack and a slow release, because when the speaker starts speaking, then I want the volume to be lowered very quickly. And once he's done, I'd want like a gradual fade up again. So that's how I'll do it.
And here comes your slightly poorly trained, overly sibilant radio host.
Do you hear how much clearer the host is now? So that's one example of sidechain compression. Let's do something to the speaker because he is overly sibilant. So what I can do is I can put a compressor on the speaker as well. I'll disable the makeup gain because the compressor will be listening to something quite a bit different than the original signal, so the makeup gain won't be properly applied. So here on the right, in the sidechain menu, I can enable equalizer. And we have a few filters to choose from. I'll choose a bandpass filter, and I'll set it around the frequency area of sibilants, which is like, which is treble, maybe something like 6 kilohertz. And I'll do a high resonance in order to really accentuate those S's. If I play it, you'll see here, you'll see it'll show more volume when the S's are present.
And here comes your slightly poorly trained, overly sibilant radio host.
Right now I'm not doing anything. if I listen, I can listen to the signal by pressing these headphones here.
And here comes your slightly poorly trained, overly sibilant radio host.
So you can hear it's even clipping inside of the sidechain, but that's not really a problem for me now because I just want a really strong indication of whenever there is sibilance. So what I'll do now is I'll reduce that threshold and I'll increase that ratio, and I'll do I'll leave it fairly quick this time. So
and here comes your slightly poorly trained, overly sibilant radio host.
Do you see that? Now we're reducing the volume only when the S's and the T's and the F's are present. And let's have a listen to that and see if that worked better.
And here comes your slightly poorly trained, overly sibilant radio host.
That works for me. Next up, let's run through some more advanced parameters of the compressor, with number 2 being the knee. In the realm of how the compressor can alter the volume of a sound, we have the opportunity to set a soft or a hard knee. If you have a look at the illustration that we've been using for visualizing the compression, if you imagine the volume curve as a leg with 2 limbs, the knee symbolizes the dent in the volume curve where the threshold comes into action. So far, we've been compressing with a hard knee, which means that the volume will be reduced as soon as it exceeds the threshold. If we use a soft knee, however, the ratio will be applied more gradually when the volume is nearing and exceeding the threshold. If I'm being honest, it's often quite difficult for me to hear the difference between soft and hard knees, but it can help make the compression sound more natural in instances where you're using a very high ratio. Alright, so for the purposes of demonstrating knees, what I'll do is I'll compress the speaker extremely. Very much, a lot more than I should. I'll do that so that we can more clearly hear the effects of the hard knee. So what I'll do is I'll do a very, very high ratio on this guy.
And here comes your slightly poorly trained, overly sibilant radio host.
And now what I can do is in the live compressor, I can adjust my knee here. As you can see, the point around the threshold becomes more and more of a smooth change. This is different for different compressors. Some compressors will only offer soft or hard knee, and other compressors like this one will offer a more fluid parameter where you can kind of adjust the amount of knee that you want. So what I'll try and do now is I'll try to A-B. So let's have a listen with the hard knee and then with the soft knee, and then see if we can spot the difference.
And here comes your slightly poorly trained, overly sibilant radio host.
So that was the hard knee, and here comes the soft knee.
And here comes your slightly poorly trained, overly sibilant radio host.
Let's do the hard knee again.
And here comes your slightly poorly trained, overly sibilant radio host.
And soft knee.
And here comes your slightly poorly trained, overly sibilant radio host.
So you can hear it's a pretty small change, but it does help in this extreme circumstance to smooth out the volume change a bit more and make the speaker sound a little more natural and organic. So that's how it works. Another volume-related parameter you might encounter is stereo linking. Stereo linking allows us to apply the same amount of gain reduction for both the left and the right channel. Usually, the compressor will treat the two channels independently, so if the left channel is above the threshold, it will be turned down independently of the right channel and vice versa. But in the case of mastering, for example, that's not always what you want, because you risk messing with the stereo balance and unnecessarily tilting the whole stereo spectrum left and right at different points in the song. When a compressor is stereo linked, it will essentially react to whichever channel is currently the loudest and apply that gain reduction to both channels, preserving the integrity of the stereo spectrum. So to show you stereo linking, I've set up two sounds, one playing in the left and one playing in the right. When the left sound is playing, the right sound will play as well, but at a lower volume. Ideally, what I'd want to do with stereo linking, when I compress these two sounds together, I'd want the relationship between the left and right volume to remain while I compress the overall volume of the sounds together. So I'll open up Ozone here, and if we have a listen real quick to the sounds without any processing. So that's what they sound like. So if I enable Ozone here, I've set up the stereo linking in the Ozone limiter so it can be more clear to us what's going on. I've adjusted the makeup gain so that the volume will remain the same and we can better see and hear the difference between when it's stereo linked and when it's not. So let's play this with my harsh limiting applied and no stereo linking and observe the difference between the input and the output. Do you see that while the volume of the one channel remains the same, the other channel is now louder because it's not linked to the other channel? So if I enable stereo linking, have a look at what happens. You can now see that the relationship between the two channels is preserved. Okay, so those are some more advanced ways to work with volume. Now let's have a look at a few more ways to work with time. Number 4, lookahead. Some compressors offer the option of lookahead. This is the mystical button that allows us to
Look into the future.
In short, lookahead allows us to apply the attack and release slightly before the sound goes above or below the threshold. This is done by slightly delaying the sound being processed by the compressor while keeping the sidechain or the sound being sensed by the compressor unchanged. It kind of relates to the sidechain techniques that we discussed earlier, but in this case, instead of changing or filtering the sound being sensed by the sidechain, we'll instead delay the sound being processed outside of the sidechain. As such, the compressor will react to a change in volume slightly before it happens in the sound we're hearing. Do you remember the previous video where we had the problem with the voice having way too strong transients after being compressed harshly with high attack times? That's one of the problems lookahead can solve for us. This way we can start reducing the volume slightly before the beginning of a word and avoid those nasty volume spikes while still having a smoother attack time of a few milliseconds. In reality, there's not really a limit to how much we can look ahead in the signal as long as we're willing to delay it for that long. Usually, only options for a few milliseconds are offered though, since that's often the most practical. What you have to keep in mind is that in order to retain the correct timing of the sound we're looking ahead in compared to the rest of your project, your digital audio workstation will delay all other tracks in your project to make it fit. This introduces what's usually referred to as latency, which we'll get back to in another video. Let me show you lookahead real quick before we move further. To show you lookahead, I've set up a little drum loop here that we are going to be compressing very harshly. Let's first listen to the drum loop by itself. Alright, and for the sake of example, let's do this extreme compression. I'll do a very high ratio. I'll do 10 milliseconds of attack, low threshold, and a 90 millisecond release. Let's listen to how that sounds. So we can hear that indeed it is very harshly compressed, but we're also getting very strong transients that I would not want in this scenario. So now what I can do is I can enable lookahead down here, and I'll enable lookahead for 10 milliseconds. That means the compression will be in full effect when we reach a sound because my attack time is 10 milliseconds as well. Let's have a listen to how that sounds. So you can hear still very compressed, but without those nasty volume spikes. I've recorded something here that we can have a look at so we can compare. This was without lookahead and this was with lookahead. Something like here, it's pretty clear that we are reducing those nasty transients by a lot. The fifth advanced control I want to show you is peak versus RMS sensing. Now that may sound a little daunting, but in reality it's a pretty simple concept which relates to the timing of the compressor. In order to understand it clearly, let me first briefly explain what peak and RMS is. There are both ways of interpreting the incoming audio. You could say that peak is sensing the immediate or instantaneous signal as it is, It's sensing the unaltered signal where even very quick changes in volume will be perceived by the compressor. The name peak refers to the fact that the compressor will sense and react to even very quick peaks in the audio volume. RMS, on the other hand, is like a moving average of the incoming signal. It stands for root mean square, which in mathematical terms means the square root of the arithmetic mean of the squares in a set of numbers, the numbers in our case being the individual samples of audio of the incoming signal. I know that might sound quite confusing. In technical terms, it's not extremely complicated, but it's definitely a few levels away from where we are in this video. You can think about it like this though. Instead of having the compressor detect the immediate or instantaneous peak levels, it will instead detect more of a moving average of the audio, making it react a little more slowly and smoothly to your sound. If I were to generalize it a bit, I would say that in cases where you want speed and precision, peak sensing is the best option for you. While on the other hand, if what you want is a slower and more organic expression, RMS sensing is what I'd use. Yep. Can you tell we're getting deeper down the rabbit hole already? Let's have a quick look at peak versus RMS sensing before we wrap up. To demonstrate peak versus RMS sensing to you, I've used the same drum loop as we did in the previous section, and now we're going to try and listen for the differences between the two sensing modes. So let's listen to the original signal first. That's how it works, and let's enable the compressor. So this gives us a bit of an exaggerated electronic sound, and that was the peak mode. Now if I switch to the RMS mode, you'll hear that the compression will be a bit slower and less reactive to the small hits in the drums, and overall it will compress more when the longer sounds are present. So let's listen to that. Let's compare with the peak. And RMS. So you can hear peak is more reactive and RMS is a bit more of an organic expression. Alright, so that's some more advanced ways to use a compressor. As you've probably figured during this video, these controls are quite a bit more subtle than what we started with. I would strongly encourage you to spend some time getting familiar with these controls before moving on, because it will ground your knowledge in dynamics processing in a way that will help you as we move further. If you have questions or advice relating to compression, please share it in the comments so that I or someone in the community can provide you feedback. Your struggles and insights can be very helpful for others in the same situation, and by participating, you're both helping yourself and the people around you. There's still quite a few things to learn about compression techniques, such as upward compression, expansion, multiband and parallel compression. Make sure to subscribe if you want to stay updated, and join me in the next video where we go deeper down the rabbit hole. Alright, I gotta say it's gonna be a bit sweaty in here by the end of the series. While we're catching our breath, let's have a look at some of your comments. So, Fexidelic said, compact and informative tutorial. Well, I'm glad you think so. Meanwhile, I feel I get a good handling of compression and how to appropriately use it, though release time is often still hard to get right for non-percussive material. Well, Fexi, I agree. Release it doesn't feel very intuitive to be setting, and I mean, I usually try and go for setting a release time that won't unnecessarily raise the tails of the sounds too much, while still being quick enough to be ready for whichever sound is coming in next. So I guess for me it kind of depends on the density of material on my audio track. And then you say, for percussive sounds, I tend to dial in my attack and release time about the time 8th to 32nd notes in my project, depending on how much I want them to stick out. That's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought about it like that before. But it definitely makes sense to set compression parameters in terms of musical parameters. And I'd be interested to hear how that works out. Aftermath Music said, thanks for putting the time into this. You are welcome, my dude. In terms of feedback, I'd love to hear compression theory for various elements in a song. For example, I understand the point and ideas behind compressing vocals, but when it comes to drums and especially parallel compression, I don't know what to look for when I'm trying to improve the sound. If you could cover that, I would be in your debt forever. Well, Aftermath, by the end of the next series, you'll be owing me your firstborn child, because we will be covering multiband and parallel compression, and we will do examples, and it will be great. And we will do drums. I think drums is a good idea, so let's do that. I think doing a few non-vocal examples would be good. So yeah, I think that's it, and it's time for me to say thank you, and I will see you soon.